request for application. What?
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, Jasmine.
Oh, no, you're fine. Next slide, please. Great. So first we'll start with webinar logistics. So I'll run you through them here, but you will also be able to see them in the chat. So first off, this webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. There'll be time reserved for live questions and answers after the presentation. Your microphones will be muted for the duration of today's webinar. However, you may submit questions via the Q&A function. You'll see that below, and it is separate from the chat function. So please be sure to use the Q&A to pose any questions today. We may answer those questions today. If we do not get to all of the questions today, though, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants with the answers to the outstanding questions after this webinar. And then, of course, after webinars, you always have questions that pop into your mind. So if that happens, please reach out to us at the Greener Cattle Initiative at our inbox, which is greenercattleinitiative@foundationfar.org. And then this webinar is being recorded, as you likely heard, and we will be posting this webinar, the recording, on the Greener Cattle Initiative webpage so you can review it later. Next slide, Nikki. So for the agenda today, we'll be doing welcome and introductions. We'll provide a program overview of the Greener Cattle Initiative. We'll briefly run through the 2023 grants awarded, and then we'll get to the meat of it, which is an overview of the 2024 RFA. And then there are many frequently asked questions, so we'll be running through some of those and providing the associated answers. And then we'll leave time for question and answers. So again, if you have a question as we're running through this slide presentation, please post it in the Q&A below. Next slide, Nikki. Okay, so for introductions, the Greener Cattle Initiative is a collaboration between the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, or FAR, and the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. My name is Dr. Jasmine Bruno, and I'm a Scientific Program Director at FAR. We at FAR are very excited to contribute to the Greener Cattle Initiative's important work. And as you can see from this slide, Greener Cattle Initiative has most certainly been a team effort, and you'll hear from some of my team members today. Now, I'll pass it over to my colleague and fellow panelist, Dr. Juan Tricarico. In addition to being an esteemed scientist, Dr. Tricarico is the GCI Program Director. So Juan, over to you to run us through the GCI overview and the RFP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. And thank you for the team for all of the work that goes behind in preparing not only the announcement that was made a few days ago, but also, of course, this webinar and everything else that goes along with eventually executing awards. I am going to give a brief overview. Many of you are probably familiar with the Greener Cattle Initiative, but some of you may be first time hearing about it for the first time, and therefore I'd like to give a brief overview. First thing I'd like to say is that the initiative is a collaborative effort. It's a private-public partnership, and the main objective here is to leverage resources and knowledge to develop mitigation practices and technologies for enteric methane mitigation. That's what it's all about. The initiative is in itself a vehicle for collaboration. It allows for exposure of new ideas. It also allows, like I said, leveraging resources and knowledge, but also de-risking R&D in an area where neither necessarily governmental funds exist or where private funds exist. It's important to recognize that the initiative fits in that particular area where private and public sectors interact and collaborate. Next slide, please. The objective of the initiative is to support research. And these research efforts are meant to enable the identification and the validation of options to mitigate enteric methane emissions. The idea here is that these options will enable that to happen but at the same time benefit farmers, ranchers, benefit the consumers, and benefit the environment. Next slide, please. The initiative was started by the Innovation Center and the Foundation for Food and Agriculture, as Jasmine mentioned at the beginning, but by ourselves we couldn't have done what we are able to do, and therefore we needed the involvement from various different organizations, which are shown here in this particular slide. All of these organizations are participants of the initiative in their steering committee. All of them have contributed resources, but also knowledge and guidance to the initiative. And therefore, I want to make sure that everybody recognizes the effort that every single one of these organizations makes in making the initiative possible. So we're going to first, very briefly, tell you about the 2023 grants that were awarded, and then we'll jump on the new call, that it's the 2024 call that all of you are here to hear about. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. And I just want to make sure that everybody that's on the call today is aware that this is the second call, and there was a first call that already occurred, and from which 3 grants were awarded. Those awards were announced in the year 2023. You can see some of the details here in this slide. I encourage every person on the call to visit the Greener Cattle Initiative webpage on FAR's website to learn more about every single one of these awards. We wanted to show them to you so that you are aware of them and that you get an idea of how these calls progress and what are the likely outcomes, or what are at least possible outcomes for this type of call. In this particular case, I want to point out that the 3 awards that were selected, the first one here on the left was primarily about selectively breeding low methane cattle. The second one in the middle was about the fate of hydrogen under normal and methane inhibited conditions. And the final one was about in vivo testing of novel compounds that have shown quite a lot of promise in vitro systems. As I said, a lot more information is available on the website. The final thing I want to point out in this particular slide is that even though we had about 4.7 million available in that first call, when you put the awarded amounts plus some of the matching funds that every single one of these individual applicants brought along with them, the investment in research exceeded our expectations and exceeds the amount that we were able to put at the researchers' disposal through the initiative itself. Okay, with that, let's move on to the most important part of the whole webinar here, which is a detailed description of the request for applications that was announced this year. Let's go to the first slide, please. This slide basically lists all the key points that I am going to be describing throughout this presentation. So every single one of these things are the things that I'm going to talk about, okay? There's going to be one slide for every one of these bullet points. Let's move on. The first slide, it's important because it has a timeline. So these are key dates that every applicant should familiarize themselves with. I'll mention that the process by which we solicit applications is a 2-stage process. So what was open on February 28 was the first step, which is the pre-applications or letters of intent. Those pre-applications are due on April 3rd. Those pre-applications are evaluated, and then a subset of those pre-applications are invited for a full application that opens on April 24th and close on June 5th. So it's important to understand that there's a 2-stage process. You see the dates. And then finally, I want to mention that we expect that the awards will be notified by around the October-November timeline, and we anticipate projects to start in early 2025. Of course, some of those things may change depending to the amount of time it takes for negotiations to occur with the specific entities that receive the awards. Next slide, please. This is an important slide, so we're going to spend some time on this one. These are the supported research areas that this particular call, the open call, is emphasizing or is calling proposals for. The most important element here is that the Greener Cattle Initiative will consider applications that address one or more of the following 4 bullet points. Let's start at the top. The first area of emphasis is basically focused on delivery mechanisms of non-vaccine enteric methane mitigation options. You can see here that we've included some illustrative examples that are not meant to be a comprehensive list, but that illustrate the type of emphasis that the call is asking proposals to address. Delivery mechanisms were identified as important because at the end of the day, options become available, but then they have to be successfully delivered to the animals so that they can actually have an impact across the industry. The second bullet point is about the impact of applying interventions early in life, which could lead to mitigating emissions later in life of that same individual, or maybe even in the offspring of that individual. The third and the 4 bullet points are 2 bullet points that I believe I have for sure received lots of questions about, but others have also interacted and received lots of questions about them too. And so the third one talks about the combined impacts of administering multiple enteric methane mitigation options. There are many questions about the different options that exist or even novel options and how those options would be additive, synergistic, or even sometimes antagonistic with some of the other ones. So combining the impacts and understanding the combination of mitigation options and what occurs when that happens is critically important. It's one of the bullet points that we're addressing. And then finally, the question about the long-term impacts of some of these mitigation options. So that's why we have long-term and longitudinal studies being emphasized to evaluate those lasting impacts of enteric methane mitigation options, obviously on the efficacy of enteric methane mitigation, but also on some of the other aspects that are important, like animal health and productivity. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'm going to talk about eligibility. And so FAR is going to welcome applications from all domestic and international entities. You can see a list there of all that qualify, and it's a pretty broad eligibility. So it's fairly rare that an organization is not eligible to apply. What is important is that those applicants need to be able to formulate that they have the skills, the knowledge, and the resources necessary to perform the work that they're proposing. Let's go to the next slide, please. We'll spend a little bit of time on this one. This slide talks about information specific to the award. In the current call, we are excited to announce that we have $5 million US currency that's available for projects that are targeting 36 months or 3 years in length. I'm going to mention that matching funds are optional for this opportunity. The way that the Greener Cattle Initiative was put together, we already have sources of private funding and public funding, and therefore there are no requirements for matching funds in this call. I want to be really clear about this. If applicants bring matching funds or if they don't, doesn't matter for the evaluation of the letters of intent and eventually for the evaluation of the full proposal. It is not an evaluation criteria. From what we've seen in the previous slide about the awards that were announced last year, it is important to point out that matching funds are important for the applicants because it allows the applicants to actually propose bigger projects and actually have larger projects, more comprehensive projects. So obviously it's up to the applicant to pursue that option if they want. But like I said, the absence or presence of matching funds is not a criteria for evaluation of the proposals. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about budget, which is the third bullet point in this slide, because budget, on the contrary, is a criteria for evaluation. And so you see here that it says requests should be reasonable and commensurate with the time, scope, and deliverables outlined in the application. So budgets will be examined closely, and budgets will be examined against the scope and against the time and against the deliverables. So that is going to mean that if budgets are not aligned with the proposed work and budgets are poorly justified, those are going to be examined and will negatively affect the overall evaluation. So as opposed to matching funds, in this case, paying attention to how the budget is prepared in the application is extremely important. Final comment about budgets here is that FAR does reserve the right to request modifications to the work plan, and therefore it is likely that the final award amounts may not be exactly the same amount that was requested through the application. And this is not unusual. Next bullet point talks about the policy for overhead or indirect costs, and it's pretty straightforward. There's a policy that 10% of the maximum request can go to indirect cost, which means that 90% of the request ends up going directly to the proposed research. This is a policy, it's non-negotiable, and it has never been an issue with any of the institutions that have applied and have received awards in the past. And it is similar to many other policies that all applicants find from other organizations or from other initiatives, that other funding agencies. Okay, finally, I would like to point out that there are key budget considerations that are specifically mentioned in the documents in the website. So the Greener Cal Initiative website is your friend. and the web page that where you can download the full document with the RFA is your friend. Spend time with it and examine all of these elements closely. If there are any questions or any concerns, do please email us at the address that you see on your screen. Particularly if you have any concerns, do it soon as well as when you identify those concerns, so that gives us time to get back to you in an appropriate manner. Let's go to the next slide, please. This slide is about requirements for the pre-application, the first phase, or letters of intent. I do want to make two comments here that are important. First, that the LOIs need to be submitted through the FAR's grant management system, and that all information provided within the LOIs are going to be treated as confidential. I'm not going to spend time discussing the bullet points that are listed here as pre-application or letter of intent components. They're pretty self-explanatory, and once again, a detailed description of them is in the document, in the RFA that you can download. So please go look them up, and if you have questions, send us an email. Let's go to the next slide. For full invited applications, as I mentioned earlier, only those applicants that are invited are the ones that are going to eventually go into the second phase and submit a full application. Not surprisingly, there are more elements, more components of that application than the letters of intent. The letters of intent are meant to be shorter, are meant to be targeted, and are meant to highlight the relevance of the work. whereas the full application needs to go into a lot more detail. Once again, I'm not going to discuss any of these bullet points because the descriptions are found in the downloadable document on the web page. Let's go to the next slide. There are in the full application requirements certain attachments that are important and should be included in the application. You can see them here. It is critical for all applicants to make sure that they get all of these attachments into the application, because if attachments are missing, then that basically disqualifies an application. So when you're going through the full application process, the FAR portal, which I'm going to mention a little bit later, needs to become something that you have to be familiar with. I would encourage everybody that intends to apply to go into the FAR portal and actually familiarize yourself, because that's the way in which you will be interacting with the FAR grants team and with us, the steering committee eventually as well, is through the FAR portal. Let's go to the next slide. So how do you apply? Well, you use that FAR's online application grant management system. And once you go in there, you're going to see that you have the places that are highlighted for you as an applicant to send in your information. You're also going to see that a lot of the components that are required there also have limits. You're not meant to submit endless amounts of text for all of these components that we're asking for. It is critically important to understand that only applications submitted through the portal will be considered. Anything that is sent to us outside of the system will not be considered. So please, once again, go to the website. It is your friend. Download that document. Examine it in detail. If you have questions, send us an email. Let's go to the next slide. We'll spend a little bit of time here because this slide talks about the review process. Because the whole announcement and the whole process is a two-phase process, the projects also have a two-stage review, as you would expect. The first stage is about the pre-applications or the letters of intent. So in this case, what happens, all of these pre-applications undergo an internal review by the steering committee. And in this case, predominantly what we're after is assessing the project's relevance to the call and the potential to meet the evaluation criteria. I'm going to mention the evaluation criteria here in just a minute. And so those applications that are show that they have the significant potential to advance our objectives, the initiative objectives, and meet evaluation criteria will be invited for a full application. And only those that are invited are able to go into the second phase. In the second phase, when the full applications get submitted, they undergo a review. And this review is more comprehensive. It has two stages itself. First, there is a peer review process where subject matter experts review the proposals on a technical basis. This technical review is used then by the steering committee to evaluate the proposals, the full proposals, not only on their technical merits, but also on the relevance and the impact. And from that review come recommendations for funding, which eventually lead to the final selections and the decisions to fund, which are executed through the FAR grants team. Let's go to the next slide. It's important to understand the evaluation criteria, because all applications will be screened for relevance. All applications will be screened for accuracy, completeness, and compliance with the guidelines, right? And like I said already, the pre-applications are examined primarily for relevance and potential to meet the evaluation criteria, but full applications are evaluated for 4 main criteria. First of all, the qualifications and the research environment. Basically, all applicants must be able to do what they're proposing that they're going to do. For the project description and approach, which is basically the methodology, and it has to do a lot with the technical merits. It's a lot of the work that comes in from that respect. But also, there's an element of budget that I already mentioned before. There has to be alignment. Then, for anticipated outcomes and output, which is primarily impact. It has to do with strategic impact and alignment with initiative goals. And then finally, with data management and dissemination and overcoming barriers to adoption, which has to do more with the ability to then multiply or get all those findings into places where they can make a difference as well, right? Is it going to be possible for the value chain to actually take these lessons learned and then implement them? Okay, let's go to the final slide here, which is about intellectual property and data sharing. I don't have anything in this slide except a big encouragement for everybody to go and read Addendum A of the call, because that explains the intellectual property, data sharing regulations, if you like, that govern the Greener Cattle Initiative. This is the legal language extracted directly from the contracts that set up the initiative. So I encourage every applicant to read them. If you have questions, you can once again email us those questions and we will address them. With that, we're going to move on to the frequently asked questions, and also we'll have some time for questions towards the end. And that's going to be led by my colleague from FAR, Lauren Hershey. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan. Hi, I'm Lauren Hershey. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, or FAR. I support this initiative from the partnering perspective, and if you have any questions about how partnering works at FAR, please feel free to reach out to me. So I'm going to start this section on the frequently asked questions that we receive. I'm going to go through them rather quickly, but be reminded that you can refer to this recorded webinar at your leisure after the fact. Can one institution submit more than one application? Yes, we do not limit the number of applications that one institution can submit, but please do see the RFA for full eligibility requirements. What size and scope of research concepts is GCI seeking? As Juan mentioned earlier, we have $5 million available for this funding opportunity, so that's the maximum available for submission. However, we require that applicants propose budget levels that are commensurate with the proposed scope of work. So if we go back to you and ask that you make modifications, please be prepared for that. For reference, our past call for proposals funded 3 projects with the same funding amount. We're not saying that that's the amount that we're seeking to fund through this round, but just to give you an idea that 3 projects were funded through the last call for proposals with the same funding amount. Do I have to secure matching funds before applying? As explained earlier, no, matching funds are not required. They are optional for this funding opportunity. So if an applicant provides matching funds, they must identify and certify the match funds at the time the grant is signed. We have documentation for that, as well as annually before the disbursement of awards. So again, to reiterate, no matching fund is required for your submission. It is optional. What is the policy on indirect costs? As described earlier, we have a policy of a 10% maximum for indirect cost, and that's of the total award. FAR's indirect cost allotment is not an indirect cost rate applied to the total modified direct cost. Instead, it's an overall allotment from the total funds requested, also known as the total project costs. This means that 90% of the total funds requested must go directly to the proposed research. If you have more questions on what can be classified as an indirect or overhead cost, please reach out to us. We also have this information on our website. I'm not sure if my research idea is the right fit. What should I do? Please review the standard criteria used to evaluate all of the programs on our website. We also have more detail about what is eligible to apply in the call for proposals. If you still have questions after reviewing these materials, please send us a detailed email to our GCI inbox at this email address below. When will I receive a response about my concept? Please refer to the dates that were shared previously in this email, or in this webinar rather. They're also going to be included on the GCI program page. Our date that we're expecting to be notifying applicants is April 24th. And so you will receive an invitation to submit a full application if you are selected on this date. Again, we keep saying this over and over again, but please reach out if you have questions. And I will say the more specific that you can be, the better. So please be specific in your questions, and we'll do our best to get back to you within 24 hours. Okay, great. I'm going to hand this over to my colleague Stephanie, who's going to conduct the live Q&A. This is another prompt that if you have questions, please go ahead and drop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen now, and we'll go through these questions. Thank you. Stephanie?
Thanks so much, Lauren. Okay, we do have a few. I have been trying to make sure some have been answered. There are some that will be answered live. Again, if you do have questions, please feel free to use that Q&A box. We'll try to get to as many as we can. For the first one, for Juan and Jasmine, I think just a better understanding of the eligibility and maybe order of operations. Would incorporations or private businesses be allowed to apply, receive a grant to conduct research, and then essentially do it with an institution of their choosing? Or considering we do have a requirement for knowing the personnel and needing to list them in the proposal, perhaps we should just go over exactly what's required there.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for that question. And what you're alluding to is correct, Stephanie. A private company can submit a grant. They're eligible to receive an award. But we have to understand who's going to conduct the research. So a private company cannot send a proposal and then subcontract another entity to conduct the research, and that entity not be part of the proposal. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. Okay, the next question. Again, more focused kind of on a private company. If it submits a grant and is awarded, I think better understanding maybe a little bit more about the Greener Cattle Initiative itself. Do the industry board members have non-exclusive commercial licenses to the technology?
Yes, great question. Thank you. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is please go read that IP statement in Addendum A. There's obviously pre-existing IP that belongs to the company that proposes because it's pre-existing. But the IP that is generated as a result of the funded work is going to be how that is decided is explained in that addendum. So I would encourage you to go and read that, and you're going to see who has the opportunity to obtain licenses for that.
Thank you. I'll ask the next question with kind of the leading statement understanding, again, about the Greener Cattle Initiative, and the steering committee participants have set those areas of focus. The question is curious about the rationale of the exclusion of vaccines. Is there a way for a vaccine developer to somehow become involved with the Greener Cattle Initiative?
Thank you so much for that question. Yes. So the answer to that question is that vaccines are excluded from this call. And this is a decision that was made when the call was put in place. And so the answer is no. If you or any participant is thinking about sending a proposal for the development of vaccines or for anything related to vaccines, it's excluded. So the answer is fairly simple. Now, I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with other organizations and other funding agencies that are specifically focused on vaccines, because there are others that are focusing on that, and send your proposals to them.
Thank you. I am seeing some questions specific to potential topics and wondering if they're eligible. I do encourage those individuals to please email that email address that was shown in this webinar with those specific questions. For another one that I think would benefit the group, if the project is more than 3 years, does Greener Cattle only fund the first 3 years and the matching fund cover the rest? Maybe explain more how that works.
That's a great question. So I am going to say the following, and I will ask Jasmine to listen carefully and maybe and maybe correct me if she is not in agreement. The way that we set up the requirements and the project is we have 36-month projects. So that is as far as we want the timeline to be. If an applicant brings in matching funds, we would expect those matching funds to be part of the 36-month project. We would not want to go down the road of creating something that is different to the requirements and guidelines that we've already set for the initiative. So that's my thought process at this moment. I think we just have to follow the rules that we've already have in place.
Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify, in terms of traditional match, that is not required for this grant. We welcome it. It won't get you preferential treatment, for instance, in review. But if a match is brought, it will need to fall within the discrete project duration of 36 months or less and be utilized in that duration. So thanks for that question.
Okay, another question. I think just to get a little more specific, are synthesized versus natural mitigators treated similarly under this RFA? I think just looking for clarification when we talk about mitigators.
Yes, they are.
Great. I do see some more questions about different things that would be in and out of scope. Again, I encourage folks to please read the RFA to better look at what is stated there as far as what is in and out of scope. Here's a clarifying question. Regarding long-term effect on productivity, does productivity include products, milk or meat, quality/safety?
Yes, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, it does. We want to understand long-term effects. As I said earlier, obviously the efficacy element, if the reduction is maintained throughout a long period, is important to be understood. But if there are other effects that negatively impact or positively impact health status and productivity of the animal, those are critically important, and therefore they will be considered.
Thank you for that. Okay. Again, just clarifying, maybe for folks who are not as familiar with Greener Cattle Initiative, wondering, is there a focus towards beef or dairy, a preference for a solution, or both?
We're accepting for beef and dairy. There is no preference.
Thank you. Another one, could you please more clearly define what's meant as long-term, so that when designing studies, they can have better input?
Long-term is is not a month. Long-term means longer periods of time that affect the life of that animal. And so it's kind of difficult for me to actually state a period of time, because it depends. It's going to vary depending on the production system that you're looking to examine, right? So in in a beef cattle system that is just fattening, a long-term study is during that whole fattening period. It could be 5 to 6 months, right? In a lactating animal, 5 to 6 months is probably not enough. It would require a longer period, like a full lactation.
Everything that Juan just added, and then also being cognizant that there's an existing research body. So we're looking for research that is going to advance the duration of studies that we see in the research body per kind of system.
Thank you both. Okay, another question, I think again, maybe covered in the actual RFA text itself, but might be just worth clarifying here. Does the knowledge created in the projects require permission from the Greener Cattle Initiative for publication?
Yes, that is covered in the RFA as well. There are clauses on how the information becomes public, and there are some embargo periods. Those that receive the award are not at liberty to discuss their findings, as soon as those findings are made. There is a reporting. There are some rules for reporting the findings, and it's
Thank you for
something
that.
that you see in every type of grant.
Okay, here's another question. Again, clarifying question. The application mentions that GCI will not consider genetic improvement of forages or concentrate feeds. This seems to apply to breeding and genetics editing, etc. Does this exclude all technologies that are applied to forages?
I'm trying to remember that discussion, and I'm gonna give my best shot at answering this question. Okay. That exclusion applies to the breeding of plants. There are plenty of funding opportunities in the space of plant breeding for specific characteristics of that plant. In these instances, I can foresee applicants wanting to send a proposal about plant breeding because consumption of those plant materials by the animal will result in lower methane emissions. Unfortunately, it's an excluded topic. I hope that answered the question.
Appreciate that. Another question for clarification, is equipment allowed to be included within the proposed budget?
Yes.
Okay. Again, clarification question. Can projects be used to manage supply chains?
I would ask the individual that wrote that question to maybe send a more comprehensive question to the email. I think it could be interpreted in various different ways.
Okay, thank you for that. I think a lot of the other questions that I've seen, we are going to be able to follow up afterwards, or I encourage those individuals, since they are quite specific, to please go ahead and email that Greener Cattle Initiative email that's included not only on the RFA, but in this webinar. Thank you all so much, and I'm going to kick it back to you, Jasmine.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Next slide. Okay, so this is just to indicate that pre-applications are due April 3rd by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So put it in your calendars, please. Thank you. Next slide. All right, so if you have any remaining questions, or a question maybe has you need clarification on that question that you presented in the Q&A, please email us at the Greener Cattle Initiative inbox at greenercattleiinitiative@foundationfar.org. And please note that even if it's a specific, for instance, grants related question, use this inbox and we will answer it accordingly. We will email all registrants answers to any unaddressed questions posted in the Q&A that we did not get to today. So please keep an eye out for those answers. And then again, this webinar will be posted on the Greener Cattle Initiative's website. So keep an eye out for that and please review. And then lastly, we want to thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to working together to provide viable options to reduce enteric methane emissions. So thank you all for your time, and we look forward to seeing your LOIs. Thank you.